So, Stephen Deeble is an award-winning writer, filmmaker, and multimedia artist. His photography and visual art has been shown in galleries across Southern California. He's written, produced, and directed several short films, as well as helping produce 2 independent features. He co-produced the winner of Science Magazine's 2017 Dance Your PhD film competition, which sounds fascinating, with his cousin, Nancy Sherrick. A Long Beach native, Stephen has helped found the Long Beach Children's Museum and ArtX Visual Arts Center, just around the corner. He has left Long Beach 3 times, as we sometimes do, but its gravity always draws him back. He returned to Long Beach last year and currently lives in Bixby Knolls. He published his first novel, Persistence of Vision, in 2017, which is what we're very excited to hear more about. And at that coffee meeting, he was telling me the backstory about this book, and I was like, oh man, people want to hear about that. So please welcome Stephen Deeble.
Thank you. Thank you very much. It's very exciting to be here to talk to you about this. So I wrote this book, Persistence of Vision. Persistence of Vision. Can you hear me? Can you hear me now? Let me get this up a little bit. So I wanted to just tell you a little bit about my experience writing it. It's my first novel. I've never written a book before. And I don't want you to get the impression that this is an instructional presentation. In fact, in many ways, what I'm going to tell you is really probably not how to go about writing a book. Because I did some things. It was kind of an experiment. But I wanted to start out by talking about what inspired me to do it in the first place. So, obviously, growing up, I was an avid reader. We've got some kids here. I hope they all love to read. My parents introduced me to reading early, and eventually I just took to it. First thing that I can really remember being engaged by was a Sherlock Holmes story. So I went right into the detective genre very early. When I started working on this, this is actually more in the genre of a Raymond Chandler, Dashiell Hammett, kind of hard-boiled noir detective story. I love that genre, so I thought I'll try writing in that genre. And what am I going to write about? And one of the things that struck me was how much I love Long Beach. And I mean, seriously, one of the things why I'm here tonight even is, I'll tell you a secret. I came back to Long Beach. First thing I did after I got settled in my apartment was I came here, and Andrew fitted me out with a t-shirt that says, Long Beach made me. And that's absolutely true. I'm a product of the school district, went to City College, took classes at Cal State, children's theater through the Parks and Recreation Department. So me personally, I'm a product of Long Beach. But one of the other things that really inspired me was my family history here. My family came to Long Beach in 1910. And my grandfather was actually involved in developing different aspects of the city. For example, if you could make this wall disappear, and the wall behind it, and the wall behind it, there's a building directly behind us at the corner of what used to be American Avenue, is now Long Beach Boulevard, and East Broadway. And my grandfather built that in 1923. It was the tallest skyscraper on the West Coast. I'm kind of proud of that. He had an office down here in the Arts District on First. He also was responsible for developing Bixby Knolls, which is one of the reasons I live there right now. Because I really, when I came back here, I wanted to get back to my roots. I really did. And it's the first time I've lived there. And it's kind of exciting to live in a place where you have that kind of connection. So a lot of Long Beach influence. So and there are a couple of specific images that come to mind when I think about this. One of them is a family thing, and that's we had this old photograph of my Uncle Joe and a guy named Harry Buffum. So people of a certain age might recall Buffum's Department Stores, which was a Long Beach chain of department stores. Well, Harry Buffum was of that family. So my Uncle Joe and Harry Buffum are 14, I think, in this picture. And they're standing on either side of Stan Laurel, of Laurel and Hardy. They were performing on Catalina doing magic, and Stan Laurel saw them, and he invited them to come out to his yacht. And so this picture shows them, 14-year-olds, standing on either side of Stan Laurel wearing a yachting outfit, captain's hat and blazer, and it's not like you normally see Stan Laurel. So, but that image has been in my mind since I was a kid. We saw that picture when we were young. The other image is one that came to me through time I spent at the Historical Society of Long Beach. My family, because they were here so early, and had such involvement in the city, they were members of the Pacific Coast Club. That's gone now. I never got to go in there. They, talked about the Pike and what the Pike was like back in the heyday. When I was growing up, the Pike was the place that every 70s television show went to when they needed a seedy, rundown location, right? But the Pike was, in fact, in the day, considered to be Coney Island of the West Coast. It was supposed to be amazing. So I would go to the Historical Society and look at these old pictures. And one of the pictures in particular that really appealed to me was the Midway that had what they called the Walk of 1,000 Lights. And the Walk of 1,000 Lights was basically strands of electric lights that went up and down this sidewalk, and at sunset every night they would turn the lights on, and people would go, ooh. And I think about that. I think, it's kind of funny that today we think about, 1,000 light bulbs, right? But what appealed to me about that was that back then, that made people go, ooh. So I wanted to kind of try and experience that for myself. So I thought, well, what if I wrote a story that took place back then? And I can actually, put myself there. Or not myself, but my characters, so vicariously I put myself there. So that's what got me started. So the first thing I did was I began by doing research. I had two things that I did for research. Specifically, I spent a lot of time in the library, down at the main library, microfilm and microfiche, going through old LA Times, trying to absorb the time period. I didn't really know exactly when I wanted it to take place. I didn't know what the story was about, but I just started pulling in information, looking at everything, articles, in the news. But one of the things that was really interesting was the advertisements, and I got something from just seeing an advertisement that today wouldn't really even be an advertisement because it wouldn't mean anything to anybody. But seeing that in that newspaper in 1929, I thought, oh my God, really? Well, that's something. And I put that in my back pocket for later. The other thing I was doing for research was going to the Historical Society of Long Beach. Now, at the time that I started this project, and it took me longer to write this book than many of you have been alive, 25 years. So a lot of my friends actually had kids, sent them to college. This is my kid, all right? This is my kid. So I spent a lot of time at the Historical Society, and at the time they were down on Pine Avenue. It took me so long to write the book, they moved 3 times. That's serious. So I started working on this just really, like I said, I spent a year just collecting information about it, trying to get a sense of the time, the place, what is this going to be about? I didn't know. So after a year of doing this, I sat down and said, okay, well, I really need to start writing. So it happened that some friends invited me to go out to Palm Springs for Memorial Day weekend. And I took my laptop with me. The place we went was this very exclusive kind of private community that had beautiful custom homes that were separated by vast expanses of grass, no fences, but you couldn't see anybody else's houses. It was just very, very exclusive and private, and a little tiny pool in the backyard. So the first day we were there, this is Memorial Day weekend, I went out, sat down next to the pool, turned on my laptop, and I started writing chapter 1. And it was like reading a book, because what I didn't do, and this is why I was telling you this is not like an instructional presentation, is I didn't do an outline. I had no idea what I was writing about. I just literally started writing this as though I were reading a book. And it started coming to me. So I sat down and started typing. And that morning, I typed the entire first chapter of this book. And at the end of that first chapter, my main character was dead. Dead. So I sat back and said, oh, that's great. What am I going to do now? Well, tomorrow morning, you're going to come back out here by the pool, and you're going to start up your laptop, and you're going to write chapter 2. So I did. And that morning, started typing, and this character came out of nowhere. I have no idea where this guy came from. But he was the main character. So I thought, okay, I'm taking this ride. And it was really literally like reading somebody else's book, only I'm writing it while it's happening. So one thing I did do also, incidentally, was the research part of it, which is really important. Doing the research on the microfiche and the microfilm, there's a guy, Guillermo del Toro, filmmaker and an author, and he was talking about doing research. And his comment was, in the day of the web, people who do their research exclusively by surfing websites, he says that's not adequate. You really need to dig deeper. And I gather there are people who do actually write books just by doing research on the internet, but I realized the limitations of just doing microfilm and microfiche research and books. So one of the things that happened because of my business travel, I actually got to go to a lot of places that, if not the actual story takes place, backstories. So a lot of this the backstory takes place in New York City, for example. So I got to go there, and I got to see Little Italy. I got to walk up and down Hester Street and go into restaurants and feel what it feels like to be in New York City, which you don't get looking at books on or websites. And again, 25 years ago, there wasn't a web for me even to use for research. So I started writing, and it took me about a year. And the story just kind of like unfolded for me. And honestly, the story that I wrote at the time wasn't necessarily what is in the final book, which was important for me. I had this problem as a writer in that I wanted it to be perfect the first time, right? And that was true of me in a lot of respects. It really kind of impaired my creativity because you don't get it right the first time, especially when you do it like I was doing it, Because, what I was really doing was making soup, right? I took a year, gathered ingredients, put them in a pot. My friend calls it back burner soup, right? Just put it on the back burner and let it cook. That's what I was doing. So I had this project going on the back burner. And so the writing part took a year, and at the end of a year, I had a first draft. And I continued to work on it as often as I could. Now, here's one of the things that I will tell you. I wrote every day. Every day. Some days I was able to crank out a couple of pages, but I was working like we all do, and some days there wasn't a lot of time. But you know what? Even if I only had 5 minutes in the morning, I wrote a sentence because that kept me moving forward. And if you do that every day, hey, at the end of the week you've got a paragraph. So that was kind of how I approached it. So the Palm Springs trip ended up becoming part of the book. The house where we were staying was really spectacular, and the house that's in the book isn't exactly that house, but it was totally inspired by that house and the circumstances under which we found ourselves at that house. It all got incorporated into the soup. So one of the things that I learned about Palm Springs, interestingly enough, at doing more research, was they had this thing in Hollywood called the 2-hour rule. So it was written into contracts with actors and actresses that if they were going to leave town to go away, they could only travel no further than it would take them 2 hours to get back to Hollywood in case somebody needed them for retakes or publicity shots or the whim of some studio executive. So that's one of the reasons that Palm Springs became kind of like the getaway for the Hollywood elite. And that image of Stan Laurel, by the way, that image kind of like stuck and ended up in the book. Stan Laurel's a character, and he's wearing his yachting outfit. But more than that, once I got going on that, I thought, I love the golden age of Hollywood. I love all these old actors, and I grew up reading books about John Barrymore and Lon Chaney and Charlie Chaplin, and they're all in the book. They're all characters in the book. So after I'd written 3 drafts, I put it away. I decided, not sure what I'm doing, the soup is still cooking. I put it away, and about, 3 years later, I decided, all right, let's work on it some more. So I had to find a floppy drive. Does everybody here know what a floppy drive is? Because this book was on floppy disks, and so I actually had to get a floppy drive and transfer these files off of this floppy drive onto my computer. And I started working on it again. And this time I did 3 more drafts, and it was moving forward. I felt pretty good about it. And after the 6th draft, I decided, all right, it's time for me to let some people read this book. So I selected from among my friends the closest people who would give me honest feedback. And it was great. I got incredible encouragement. And so, except for one person, and this guy basically, Chris Callard, there he is right there. Chris called me up and he goes, hey, I'm reading your book. There's a historical inaccuracy. I was like, there is? And he said, yeah, Balboa Studio. Did you know Balboa, there was a movie studio in Long Beach? It's like a full production movie studio from 13 to 1918. He says, they were closed by the time your story takes place. And I thought, oh my God, I've screwed up. How did I make that mistake? And I was confronted with this situation where I'd actually written significant amounts of the book with this studio in Long Beach and people working at it and things happening around it. And I had to ask myself, well, do I just say writer's license? Or do I actually figure out a different way to approach this and change it? So after a couple of months of avoiding it, I decided, you know what, I need to actually change this. So I started working on a rewrite. So I did one entire draft in which I had to geographically restructure this story. So that was the entire draft. And I don't remember how long that took me, but when I was done, thank you, Chris, I realized what had happened was I love Long Beach, okay? I love Long Beach. It took it out of Long Beach enough that it made it more broad in Southern California. So I think ultimately that makes it a stronger story. So then that was another draft. That was the 7th draft. I did some experimenting. This is one of the things. Writing this book was really, for me, learning how to write a book, because I'd never done it. I'd written screenplays. Screenplays are very different, though. Screenplays are almost like technical documents, instructing how to do something. Here, how to make this movie. Writing a book is not like that. So the next draft, I did an experiment. I knew the backstories of my characters, and I thought, what if I actually put interposed chapters in the book in which we go into the backstory of the character? You leave the current storyline, and now you're just dealing with the backstory of the character. So I did that. I had 4 chapters that were dealing with his childhood and what happened to him that led him to be who he is. I felt that was important. But when I read that draft back, I thought, it's great information, but it interrupts the flow of the story. So the next draft was taking those out. I literally removed the things that I had put in. So, funny thing happened, though, and that is that while the chapters were gone, the information that had been in those chapters that was discrete had kind of infected the rest of the book. So the information was still there, but now it was in a more subtle kind of way, presented in a different way, which I think worked better. I did a lot of experimenting. At one point, I think one of the last drafts, I tried going from third person to first person. I thought, I read somewhere that first person detective novels were hot. So mine's third person. Can't be too hard to convert it to first person, right? Guess what? There's a lesson right there. The point of view of a book is not just something you can globally change with, take every you and make it an I. The point of view of the book is everything. And so after I tried doing that with one chapter, I said, this is stupid. This is not going to work. Okay, just take this as a lesson and move forward. Keep going. And again, that's kind of the ultimate message, is keep going. Don't stop just because something's not working. So then I had completed enough drafts that, well, there was one more pretty significant draft that I had to go through, and that was, this is kind of funny. I took out the chapters with the backstory and put them back in again, put them in and took them out. This went on a lot. But there was one other thing that I had to change, and that was, I call the book Persistence of Vision, okay? It's a reference to something that is in the book, and it thematically was important to me. What I found was, again, it's not part of the genre, the detective novel, right? So I thought, well, what if I took that thing out and I just removed all references to this? And I'll tell you, right, frankly, it refers to a condition that this detective has in the book where he is unable to see motion pictures. He lacks what they call persistence of vision, the ability to actually retain an image on your retina long enough to create the illusion of motion. That's how movies work, okay? He can't see movies, and there's a reel of movie film that's a key piece of evidence. This is in the book cover. It's not a spoiler. So I thought about this. I thought, well, I love this idea, and other people have kind of responded to it, but what if I took it out? Would the book be stronger as a result? Would it be, I hate to say it, more marketable? Because that was kind of one of the things I was thinking about. So I took out, painstakingly removed, every reference to his inability to see movies. All of this is gone. And I read this, and it just didn't feel right. And I, again, didn't know what I was doing, so I put it away. And it was only after a couple of more years that I had a conversation with somebody, a friend of mine who's an author, and she was telling me, the thing is, you got to find a thing that makes your book unique. And I thought about what she said, and I thought, well, the thing that made my book unique was the persistence of vision, and I cut that out. And I thought, you know what? I cut the heart out of my book. And so I did another draft in which I put all those references back in. And then when I was done, I thought, okay, not only was that important to put back in, but that's actually the title of the book. I'd gone through 3 titles. The first title was Red Blossoms, which is an allusion to the flowers of a desert plant called the Ocotillo. Then I called it Dead Soldiers, which was a lot of veterans from World War I are in the book, and there's also a drinking problem, so dead soldiers, empty bottles and so on. But when I called it Persistence of Vision, it was like magic. It was like, oh my God, now all of a sudden this completely makes sense to me, and I understand what I'm doing. So then it was a matter of finding an editor. And I have a friend who I had gone to UC Irvine with who ended up working at the university as a librarian. She had studied grammar and rhetoric. And as a writer, I got to tell you, having an editor is really important. Somebody that can look over your shoulder and tell you, this is working, this isn't working. It's not just about punctuation and syntax. What Lisa did for me was really amazing. She sent me spreadsheets that she developed. One of the spreadsheets was just the characters in the book. And this was great because, the way I wrote it, making soup, I didn't have a recipe. And what she was giving me was recipe stuff that I could look at and then go, oh, that's who that guy is. That's where he is in the book. And it was so helpful. Also because she was a librarian at the University of California, she had access to the resources of the University of California system. So when I called her and said, hey, could you get me a picture of the front page of the LA Times from 1929 with the article about Leland Stanford trying to take credit for the invention of motion pictures? It was in my inbox in 5 minutes. That was pretty great. So Lisa did an incredible amount of work, and I cannot thank her enough. I wish she was here tonight so that I could thank her in person. So then we had to publish. One of the things that I did like 5 years before I finished the book was I started thinking about it. What am I going to do? And it was it's just kind of a weird coincidence. Everybody who writes, I think, has at least one copy of Writer's Market. You can tell, like in my case, at one point I had 3 copies of Writer's Market. like different years when I thought, oh, I'll get a copy of Writer's Market, and I ended up with 3 different years. So anyway, I actually broke it open and I started reading the chapter on getting a literary agent because I thought that might be a good thing to do. I want to know how to do it. When I finished reading that, I thought, okay, well, now I need to get on the internet and start searching. So as it happens, because I think Nancy mentioned I've done film and video production. The next day we were doing a shoot, and I was part of a crew, and we all loaded in the van and started driving around Southern California. And lo and behold, we're going to literary agents and asking them, what do you want? So I'm actually sitting in the offices of literary agents. Total coincidence. I'm looking at it one day in the book, the next day I'm in their offices. Unrelated, but you better believe I made as much of that as I possibly could. So so that was pretty big. Then, I think the single best decision I made, other than writing the book, was when it came time to do a cover. And I had this kind of idea that I wanted it to be a collage, which at the time I didn't understand. But then once I found the guy and he did the cover, it totally made sense. Sam Lubitsch responded to my ad and showed me some amazing collage art. He comes from a dynasty of collage artists, actually. His father was one of the original graphic artists for Slash magazine, Lou Beach. And Sam did an amazing job. In fact, that cover did not change except when I changed the title to Persistence of Vision. We had to do that one change. But otherwise, it was exactly what he created when he created it. And I'm so happy with it. And I'll tell you something. People look at this book cover, and they have to pick it up. This was so worth it. It's great. And, please feel free to judge this book by its cover, okay? Yeah, seriously. So I got it done, and after all that, I got it published. I self-published it. And I just wanted to share with you a couple of little things that I learned from this experience. The first and I think most important thing is, if you're working on something, don't stop. Keep going. Even if there are little barriers, just keep going. You'll get there. And I think the most important lesson is, if somebody ever tells you that you can't do something, especially if it's yourself, don't listen. Because I didn't think I could write a novel. I really didn't. But guess what? I wrote this. That's my story, and I'm sticking to it.